Nastya positioned the oatmeal on dishes, sketched an amusing expression with jam onto her son's plate. "Men, morning meal," she beckoned, pouring freshly brewed tea into cups. Shurik settled at the table and gazed unhappily at his plate. "I don't fancy porridge," he stated gloomily. "What's this update? Oatmeal is quite nutritious. If you desire to visit the ice rink, you must first have a satisfying breakfast." Boris settled down opposite his son, scooped up the oatmeal, and directed it to his mouth. It's delightful. Our mom is a sorceress. Trust me, no one prepares oatmeal as delectable as our mom." Shurik looked at his father incredulously, but also took the spoon in his hand. When he had finished everything, Nastya cleared the vacant plate and offered her son a cup of tea. "Is something amiss?" she inquired her husband. "You've been so contemplative lately. Is there an issue at work?" "I consumed everything. When are we heading to the ice rink?" Shurik asked cheerfully. "Proceed to engage in recreation. Mother and I require conversing." Boris apprehended his son's discontented expression. A bit later, "Proceed forth." Briefly, Nastya pondered if she could decipher her son's musings. He debated whether to shed tears, for the ice skating rink might shudder after the discussion, or to retreat to his chamber and confront uncertainties. She beamed at her son and gestured, affirming the rink's existence, albeit postponed. Shurik dismounted the stool and departed from the dining area with a wounded countenance. "So what vexes you?" Nastya settled into Shurik's vacated spot. "I'm uncertain how to commence. I'm baffled myself," Boris articulated, twirling a teacup on the table. "Do you possess a lover? Do you wish to rendezvous with her?" Nastya inquired straightforwardly. "Nastya, what are you doing? How could you entertain such thoughts?" Boris flared up with righteous indignation. "What could I contemplate? If everything is fine at work, what else could cause you such concern?" Nastya was starting to lose patience. "I requested you to take out the garbage yesterday. You nodded, but you forgot about the trash. You seem preoccupied. Tell me, but don't deceive," Nastya said cautiously. Boris looked at his wife attentively. "My mother came to see me," he finally squeezed out. Nastya saw that the words were not easy for him. "In a dream? And what did she tell you from the other side of the world that unsettled you for a few days?" she asked jokingly. "No, not in a dream. She's alive." Boris sharply pushed the cup away from him. The tea spilled out onto the table. Nastya immediately jumped up, took a sponge from the sink, and wiped up the puddle. "She's dead. Or have you been lying to me all this time?" Nastya threw the sponge into the sink and sat down at the table again. "I wasn't fibbing. Don't you grasp? She genuinely passed away for me," Boris responded, irritated by his wife's incomprehensibility. "So let's proceed orderly. Deceased, living, elaborate." "I'm listening attentively." "Elaborate what?" "I was 10 years old at the moment, I think. My father was drinking. He and my mom argued a lot. She was beautiful, and my father was very envious of her. He even raised his hand to her. She concealed the bruises, but I could see them. That day my father came home very intoxicated. He began accusing Mom of drinking because of her. Mom kept quiet at first, but it seemed to irritate Dad significantly. I went to my room and heard them yelling at each other. Then suddenly something weighty fell, and everything went quiet. I sat for a while and left the room. My father was lying on the floor with his arms spread out. There was a trickle of blood oozing out of his head, and Mom, she was standing over him with her hands over her mouth. She witnessed my presence and urged me to leave the kitchen. My father had recently collapsed, and she intended to summon an ambulance. However, instead of an ambulance, the police arrived during that time. My mother accompanied them, assuring me that she would return soon, and I should wait for Aunt Lena, who happens to be my father's elder sibling. I patiently waited in the hallway until Aunt Lena finally arrived. Upon her arrival, she mourned for my father and accused my mother of being a killer, insisting that she deserved imprisonment. Then, she instructed me to pack my belongings, stating that I would stay with her. I felt helpless and didn't know what to do. Aunt Lena shared a lot of unfavorable things about my mom. I vehemently disagreed, passionately asserting that my mother was kind, loved my father dearly, and was not involved with anyone else romantically. Unfortunately, nobody paid attention to my protestations. Furthermore, Uncle Sergei, Aunt Luba's husband, advised me to keep the entire incident to myself. He suggested that it would be better if everyone believed my parents had died in an accident, to avoid any persecution at school due to my mother's alleged crime. My mother never arrived for me, never penned or phoned. Consequently, I ceased expecting her. I was nourished, dressed, but not cherished. I sensed that my father's sibling didn't require me. Once I borrowed 10 rubles from her wallet. I don't recall what for. She wouldn't grant me the money. She noticed and struck me. She stated that if I thieved money once more, she would dispatch me to an orphanage. I was merely anticipating growing up and departing from them. I don't know how I didn't turn into a delinquent or a drug addict. After finishing high school, I arrived here and got admitted to the Polytechnic Institute and encountered you. I had grown so accustomed to deceiving everyone that my parents were deceased that I didn't reveal the truth to you. I was scared you'd lose affection for me if you knew I was the offspring of a killer. God, how much you've endured. Nastya concealed her husband's hand with her palm. You never saw her again. Mother. Negative. Upon her arrival at my workplace 3 days back, I failed to recognize her, yet I was aware it was her. I sensed it. Initially, I had no desire to engage in conversation with her. I still harbored resentment towards her for departing, for the lack of communication, for my father's demise, for the destruction of my life. However, she gazed at me so intensely that I consented to hear her out. We visited a nearby cafe. Nastya, I'm hesitant to confess, but I find myself pleased by her presence in my life. And what were her words? Did she genuinely cause your father's death? Nastya looked at her spouse with tension. Boris nodded. As I mentioned, it occurred accidentally. When my father swung at my mother, she pushed him away. He lost his balance and fell, hitting the corner of the table with his temple. Did they incarcerate her? Nastya asked in a hushed tone. Affirmative. Father had recent contusions on his chest. They believed it was Mother who struck him during their altercation. Mother didn't exhibit any indications of bruising. It wasn't self-defense, but pre-planned. The neighbors and Aunt Lena testified against Mother at the trial. She mentioned she composed me letters, but I never received any. Aunt Lena must have ripped them apart and disposed of them. In one of the letters, Mother requested me to meet her. She displayed the letter in which Aunt Lena responded that I had abandoned her, that I didn't need a homicidal parent. I was unaware of any of that. But as I matured, I refrained from searching for her, attempting to uncover the truth. So many years, Nastya witnessed how Boris was enduring. However, why did she only discover you now? Why didn't she come when she was liberated? Nastya inquired. I inquired about the identical inquiry from her. She felt fearful. That's the information she conveyed. Fearful I wouldn't trust her, wouldn't pardon her. She expressed that she had been tracking my life all the years, knew everything about me, perceived me, and I hadn't taken notice. Boris grasped his head, ruffled his hair. She sold her flat and relocated here to be nearer to me. Boris continued after a brief pause. She cleaned the entrances, toiled as a janitor in a store, although she had graduated from the history department of the university. But they wouldn't permit her to work at the school any longer. She thought I would be ashamed of her. She was right, actually. And now, where does she toil? At the local history museum as a guide, occasionally giving tours of the city. Nastya contemplated for a minute. I think I've seen her. What does she resemble? Typical. Tall, slender, I'd even say thin, eyes very melancholy. That's correct. An analogous lady stood at the entrance and observed us while Shirka and I were approaching from the shop. I kept the door ajar and extended an invitation for her to come in, but she declined. She was clad in a black lengthy coat and a pink beret. Yes, that's her. She mentioned she frequently visited us. So, what does she desire? Nastya wrapped her arms around herself as though she was chilly. Does it trouble you to learn that my mother slew my father, even if it was an accident? It has been a considerable time. She has served her sentence, atoned for her actions. Boris defended his mother. She simply wishes to converse, to become better acquainted with us. And what shall we disclose to Shurka? Where did the grandmother emerge from? Nastya shivered as if from the cold. That's not an issue. We'll state she resided overseas. She didn't ring because she wasn't aware of her phone number. That's not what I'm anxious about. I expended so many years existing without her, assuming she'd abandoned me, you know? I know she didn't, and yet. But I can't persistently claim she's deceased either, just like I can't label her mom. The initial moment I was in shock. I didn't desire to converse with her, and now I'm embarrassed I didn't seek her out personally. I'm not evaluating you. I mean, it's comprehensible. Childish resentment and all that. You trust her? Do you think she unintentionally pushed her father? Nastya inquired the question that had been troubling her. I've been contemplating it a lot these days, recollecting. Yes, I'm certain. Boris even straightened up when he stated that. And when did you determine to visit her? Tomorrow, and we'll all go together. Don't make those eyes. She's my mother. Oh, Boris, why don't you go alone first? Without me and Shurka? He needs to be prepared. Affirmative, you are correct. Presently, we're heading to the ice rink because Shurka's already anticipating. We have time to acclimate to the notion that I possess a mother and Shurka has a grandmother. I'm not accustomed to it personally. Everybody says that while your parents are alive, you sense like a child, but I don't feel anything like that. I'm accustomed to being without her. I've grown accustomed to that term. Boris swept his fingers through his hair again. And how did you converse with her? How did you address her? No way. She was speaking, and I was listening. You know, as I was conversing and listening to myself, I realized I never ceased waiting for her. So, ice rink? Boris got up from the table. His thoughtfulness was gone. Shurka, prepare yourself, we're going to the ice rink. He shouted cheerfully and exited the kitchen. Currently, it was the moment for Nastya to ponder. Throughout the night, she couldn't fall asleep for an extended period. Boris, conversely, experienced a peaceful sleep for the first time in recent days, without restlessly turning or sighing. And I assumed he had a lover. What a fool. Nastya lay awake, gazing at the dimly lit, white ceiling, recalling. Her connection with her mother was not seamless either. They frequently failed to comprehend each other, unable to truly listen, especially when her father departed from their lives. Mom attempted to establish her romantic life, and Nastya disapproved. She often departed from home, particularly when men came to visit her mother. And when Nikolay started living with them, Nastya wanted to escape from home. Once, when her mother scolded her for arriving home late, Nastya yelled that she detested her. She didn't comprehend the significance of the term at that time. She merely didn't adore her mother at that instant, and the contrary affection is hatred. It was only afterward that somebody explained that to despise is to not perceive a person, as if he stops to exist for you. It's the equivalent as desiring him deceased. The connection between them finally turned bitter. So Nastya misplaced her mom too. She treated her as if she didn't exist, as if she were deceased to her. Nastya scarcely completed school and departed for a different city. They contacted her on the telephone. She sometimes arrived to visit on holidays, but they never had a sincere talk. Nastya wiggled. I'll call tomorrow and apologize. We never reconciled. Immature offenses. Shurka is maturing. I, too, will meddle in his life, attempt to deter him from making errors. How can I make certain he doesn't cry out one day that he detests me? Nastya arose and headed to the kitchen. In the dim light, she gazed at the bluish disk of the moon through the window. Life is so intricate. Boris lost his mother and then reunited with her. Meanwhile, I hadn't lost mine, but we feel so distant. Perhaps I should call her now, Nastya thought, checking the integrated electronic timer on the stove. It was 1:30. Tomorrow, I'll make that call and express my affection for her. The next morning, while Boris was in the shower, Nastya dialed her mother's phone number. "Oh, Nastya, I stayed awake all night worrying about you. And now you're calling. Is something wrong?" Her mother's voice reflected both joy and concern. "Mom, I apologize. I truly love you," Nastya said. "Daughter, what's going on? It sounds like you're saying goodbye. Are you okay?" her mother asked anxiously and in a hurry. "I'm not saying goodbye. On the contrary, I really wish to see you. Last night, I was thinking about you too. Mom, I'm going to have a baby. However, Boris doesn't know yet." "Oh, my daughter, I'm so delighted. If you require me, I'll come and assist you." "You don't need to. Boris's mom will aid. She resides close by." "What about Nastya? She's deceased." "That's what he assumed. She's alive and in good health. I'll inform you later." "All right, Mom. Kisses, Nastya." But Nastya fainted because the water ceased running in the bathroom. It is necessary to prepare breakfast, tidy up, and get ready to greet her husband's mother. "I think I'm anxious," pondered Nastya and put the kettle on the stove. We all have unpleasant, distressing memories from our childhood that we don't like to discuss. We are ashamed of them. We often evaluate our parents, blame them for our setbacks. Mom gave us life, and we store up resentments against her. We do not contemplate how she feels when we do not call for a prolonged period. And when we summon the courage to come and apologize, it's too late. Every individual, at any age, requires a mom, because only she will comprehend, pardon, and sympathize.